Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is Trusty Rusty Depot, and today I'm going to be introducing Git and GitHub, so let's dive right into it. So before we start, what is Git? Now, Git is a version control system, otherwise known as a VCS, that allows you to keep track of your changes and also go back to previous versions of your code. So without further ado, let's open up our terminal. I'm going to be using the project we started in our last video, so if you want to follow along. So the first important command is git init. And all this does is it will create a new Git repository, which is the word we use when we talk about Git. And this will allow you to then use Git to keep track of all of your changes. However, if you're using Rust and you've already called cargo new, you don't need to do git init because cargo new will automatically do that for you. So if we are in our Advent of Code 2015 project and we type git status, we can see that we have a bunch of files here that have not been added to Git yet. And what that means is when you create a change, you need to add those to be staged in order to then commit those changes into the history of the repository. So every single change will first be staged to be ready to be committed. And it tells us that nothing is added. So all these files, they're called untracked files because they haven't been added to Git yet. So what we can do is we can use this suggestion here. It says use git add to track. So what we're going to do is we're going to say git add and we're going to put a dot. Dot just means the current directory that we are in. So this whole folder will be added to Git. We do that, and now if we say git status, we can see that there are changes to be committed. So now that we've added these files, Git sees those files and tells us that we can commit those files to the Git history. So let's do that by saying git commit and then -m, and then quotation marks. And then we need to add a message, so we can say first working commit. And now, if we call git status, we can see that there's nothing to commit and the working tree is clean. So now we've committed these changes to the history. So how do we check the history? Well, we can check the history by saying git log, and we can see that we have here our first working commit. So now let's go into our main file and let's pretend this is another change to the file. We're going to close that and we're going to add that change. So git add dot, and then we're going to commit that change by saying add another change. Now we can see in our git log that we have two commits, and the first one is this one down here, and then we have add another change. So now what if we want to add a new feature to our code without disrupting the changes that we have made so far? And this is where branches come in. Now, branches are a way to work on parts of the code outside of the original code so that we don't disrupt or accidentally make any changes to the original code. So we can add a branch by saying git branch feature. And now if we git branch -- all, we can see that we have a main branch, which is the default branch, and that's the one we're on, hence the star there. And we have a branch called feature. And if we go to the branch, so we can say git checkout feature, Now, if we say branch dash dash all, we can see that we're on the feature branch. So now inside of this feature branch, we can make a change and we can say add a feature. We can close this and we can add that and commit it. We can say fancy new feature. And now we go back to our main branch and we look at our file and we can see that that change is not there. But if we look at our feature branch, the change is there. Now, let's say we're done working on this feature and we want to merge it with the main branch. We want to take all the feature changes and put them in the original files. So we can go back to the main branch and we can say git merge feature, the name of the branch. And when we do that, we can then look at the file and we can see that we have this feature there. So that is a way to keep track of different features and to have them not interact with each other so that you don't mess up your original code. Now, what if you want to share this code with other people and you want them to be able to use it and change it and upload new changes? So that is where GitHub comes in. Now, GitHub is an internet hosting service for software developed with Git or another version control system. There are other hosting services that exist, but for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to show you GitHub. So I'm going to hop into my GitHub account, and you can create an account for yourself if you don't have one already. So here's my GitHub account, and I'm going to create a new repository, a new GitHub repository, by clicking on this plus sign and saying new repository. And I'm going to call it 2015 Advent of Code Solutions. And I'm not going to give it a description, but I'm going to make it public, but you guys can make it private if you want. And I'm going to click create repository. So now that we're here, we can copy this link that it gives us to the repository, and we're going to use that link in order to add a remote to this repository so that it links it with the GitHub. So git remote add origin and that link that we just copied. And that will add the remote to the configurations of this repository. And then what we want to do is set branch to main, and then we're going to push all the code, but we're going to also use the -u to tell it to set this as the default for pushing. So we're going to say origin main. Origin is the name of the remote that we're using, and main is the branch that we're pushing to. And it's going to set this as the default for us because we've used -u. So now it's pushed all of our code to this repository. So if we go back to our repository and we reload, we can see all of our code here. We can even see our fancy new feature and all of our code. We can also, in addition, look at all of the commits we have made. Now, in order to show you what happens if somebody changes the code, I'm going to change the code from GitHub itself by telling it to add a README. And I'm going to say mini project 1 code. Then I'm going to commit this. I'm going to call this commit create readme d, and I'm going to tell it to commit directly to the main branch. I'm going to say commit new file, and now we can see that we have 4 commits and we also have a readme right here. So if we go back to our terminal, it doesn't know all the changes we've made. It doesn't have the README file in here. If we list the files, we don't see the README file. So what we need to do is pull the changes from GitHub, and we can do that by saying git pull, and that will pull all the information from GitHub. And now we can see, if we list the files here, that we have a README file. And if we open it up, we see what we wrote in the README file. So that's it for my basic intro to Git and GitHub. Thank you for watching, and in my next video, I will be continuing to talk about the Advent of Code mini project, and hopefully you'll be able to follow along. All the code will be on GitHub for you to check out. So I'll see you then.